Governor Marcus Davis never expected that his daughter would be arrested just for being black in an expensive car. This incident was supposed to change everything, for Jasmine and for those who face bias every day. What happened next will shock even the most experienced. But let's start from the beginning. It was a hot afternoon in the heart of the metropolis. Traffic jams and city hustle everywhere. Officer Henry Calloway was sitting in his patrol car at an intersection, watching the flow of vehicles. He had a familiar route, and over the years had formed his own opinions about who might pose a threat. When a luxurious black car passed by with a young black woman behind the wheel, he felt an internal tension, though there was nothing suspicious about the car. Something's off here, Calloway thought, and his hand instinctively reached for the siren. Cars like that don't belong in these neighborhoods. Without hesitation, he turned on the lights and siren, signaling the driver to pull over. Meanwhile, Jasmine Davis was hurrying to an important meeting with her father, Governor Marcus Davis, to discuss an upcoming charity event. She had grown up in an environment where she was respected and valued for her intellect and strength, but she was no stranger to bias. Still, when she heard the siren and saw the patrol car in her rearview mirror, a chill ran down her spine. She obediently pulled over, trying to figure out what could be wrong. Officer Calloway approached the car with a slow, confident stride. His hand rested on his holster, though he didn't feel threatened. He looked at Jasmine through the lowered window, and her calm demeanor only heightened his suspicion. "License and registration," he ordered coldly, with a hint of mistrust in his voice. Jasmine handed over the documents calmly, but before she could ask why she was stopped, Calloway had already shifted into an accusatory mode. He glanced at the documents quickly, ignoring her last name, but something made him internally wary. Too nice a car for an ordinary girl, he thought. "Step out of the vehicle," he demanded without bothering to explain. Jasmine, trying to remain calm, asked, "What did I do wrong?" Her voice was quiet but firm. Calloway didn't answer. He felt a sense of power in the situation and was convinced something was amiss. "You're being arrested for disobeying a police officer and resisting arrest," he declared, almost without thinking. He immediately cuffed her, ignoring her protests and pleas for an explanation. Jasmine tried to maintain her dignity, but the shock and humiliation were overwhelming. She couldn't believe that in just a few minutes her life had turned upside down, and now she stood handcuffed on the side of the road. This was a moment that should have ended with a simple conversation, but Calloway's bias and questionable motives made it much more serious. Sitting in the back of the patrol car, Jasmine, for the first time in a long while, felt completely helpless. Yet, she knew this wasn't the end. She was the governor's daughter, and this incident was bound to come to light. At the police station, where Jasmine was taken, her emotions fluctuated between shock and anger. Her world, where there had always been clear lines between right and wrong, justice and injustice, had suddenly collapsed. She was placed in a cold, sterile cell with a metal bench, and the handcuffs still pressed heavily on her wrists. Her heart raced, and her mind spun with thoughts. How could this happen? What did I do wrong? Meanwhile, Officer Calloway, filling out paperwork at the station, remained unaware of the gravity of what he had done. He was convinced he had acted correctly, following his instincts and suspicions. In his mind, he was a hero preventing a potential crime, even though no crime had been committed. It didn't even occur to him to look more closely at Jasmine's documents, and he certainly hadn't imagined she was the governor's daughter. On the other side of town, Governor Marcus Davis was impatiently awaiting his daughter's arrival at the important charity event. Jasmine had always held a special place in his life. Smart, determined, and strong, she embodied everything he had fought for and achieved. When she didn't show up on time, Marcus initially thought she was stuck in traffic, but when her phone went unanswered, his concern grew. After some time, Jasmine was finally allowed to make a call. Her hands still trembled as she dialed her father's number. Marcus's usually calm and confident voice immediately changed when he heard her faltering words. "Dad, I've been arrested. I don't understand what's happening." Her voice shook with a mixture of anger and fear, which alarmed him even more. "What? Arrested?" Marcus froze, his face going rigid. "Where are you? I'll come right now." Marcus wasted no time. He knew he had to act immediately. His anger was not just as a father, but also as a leader who had always fought for justice. This wasn't just about his daughter. It was about a deeply rooted problem: bias and racism in law enforcement. He had always known these problems existed, but now it had hit home. When Marcus arrived at the police station, the atmosphere shifted. Every officer in the building felt the tension when they learned who had entered. The governor of the state, a man no one wanted to face in such a situation. The police chief, hearing of his visit, immediately came out to meet him, trying to mask his nervousness. He knew a serious mistake had been made, but it was too late to fix it quietly. "Where is my daughter?" Marcus asked sharply, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Governor Davis, we'll get to the bottom of this," the police chief began. But Marcus could already see through his attempts to smooth things over. He walked past him, heading straight to where Jasmine was being held. By this time, Officer Calloway, sitting at his desk in the back of the station, started to feel uneasy. He saw the tension rising, but still didn't understand that his actions had led to a disaster. When he was told to go to the interrogation room, where Jasmine and her father were waiting, he began to realize that something had gone very wrong. Officer Calloway, caught off guard, entered the interrogation room with a growing sense of anxiety. He hadn't expected to see Marcus Davis, the governor of the state, and one of the most powerful people in the city. The tension in the room was palpable, and Calloway already felt that his actions had led to something much bigger than he could have imagined. Jasmine sat at the table opposite her father, who, while trying to maintain composure, could not hide his anger. Calloway walked in, stiff and tense. He knew he had to explain himself, but he hadn't fully grasped the extent of his mistake. "Are you the officer who arrested my daughter?" The governor's voice was quiet, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. Calloway hesitated for a moment, sensing that the whole station's attention was now focused on him. "Yes, sir. She disobeyed my orders and acted suspiciously." His words came out uncertainly. He tried to remain calm, but he could feel the situation slipping out of his control. "Suspiciously?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, his face hardening. "You arrested her because she's black and driving an expensive car? Is that what you call suspicion?" Calloway felt his throat go dry. He had no idea what to say. He had never faced a situation where his decisions were challenged by someone so influential. He was used to his suspicions going unquestioned, and certainly no one had ever suspected that there might be prejudice behind his actions. "I was following protocol," he began to explain, but Marcus cut him off. "Protocol? Is your protocol arresting innocent people without cause?" The governor's voice grew firmer. "You didn't even bother to look at her documents, did you?" The silence in the room became almost tangible. Calloway realized he was trapped by his own prejudices. He hadn't thought about the consequences, hadn't considered who this woman was. Now he faced the reality. Jasmine was not only innocent, but also the daughter of a man whose power could destroy his career. The police chief, standing in the corner of the room, quickly recognized the seriousness of the situation. He knew this confrontation should never have happened, but it was too late to undo it. He stepped in, trying to diffuse the tension. "Governor, we deeply regret this incident. It's a misunderstanding, and we will release Ms. Davis immediately." But Marcus was not interested in compromise. He wasn't just seeking his daughter's release. He wanted this incident to become a lesson for the entire system. Too often, officers like Calloway abused their authority. "A misunderstanding?" Marcus's eyes flashed with anger. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. This is a prime example of how your system operates against black people. And I will make sure this case sets an example for everyone." Jasmine, who had been silent until now, finally raised her head and looked at her father. She knew he had always fought for justice, but this case hit close to home, making it even more significant. She could feel his anger and resolve, but she also understood that this moment was important, not just for her, but for countless others who faced similar injustices. At that moment, Officer Calloway fully realized that his career was hanging by a thread. Jasmine was released almost immediately, but the repercussions of her wrongful arrest were only beginning to unfold. As soon as she stepped out of the police station, her father, Marcus Davis, was already in discussions with lawyers and media representatives. This incident could not be swept under the rug. For him, this wasn't just a personal issue. It was a chance to address the systemic injustice that had been ignored for far too long. While Jasmine and her father made their way home, news of the incident began to spread. Social media exploded with posts about the wrongful arrest of the governor's daughter. People expressed outrage, sharing their own stories of biased policing. Soon, every major news outlet had picked up the story, and within hours, Jasmine Davis's name became a symbol of the fight against racial discrimination in law enforcement. Officer Calloway, returning home after a long shift, couldn't shake off the unease. His usual sense of righteousness had vanished, replaced by fear for his future. In just a few hours, his name had become synonymous with racist actions, and now he couldn't ignore the consequences of his decision. His superiors called him in for a conversation, and his future in the department was in jeopardy. Calloway realized that he could no longer hide behind protocols and excuses. His actions were now being judged in the court of public opinion and justice. Meanwhile, Marcus Davis was using his political platform to push for change. He spoke out in front of the cameras, condemning not only Calloway's actions, but the entire system that allowed such incidents to happen. "This isn't just about my daughter," he said during a press conference. "This is the daily reality for thousands of black people in our country who face bias and injustice simply because of the color of their skin." His words sparked a wave of public support. Politicians, activists, and everyday people began openly discussing the problem of racial discrimination in law enforcement. Jasmine, who initially felt like a victim, began to realize that her story could help others. She took part in rallies and protests, speaking on behalf of those who couldn't find justice. Meanwhile, Officer Calloway was temporarily suspended from duty. His mind constantly replayed the events, realizing that his career was crumbling because of a decision he had once believed to be right. He began to understand that his own biases and stereotypes had led to a catastrophe. However, this realization came too late. Public pressure was too great. In the end, this case became a turning point for the police department. Internal investigations began, along with new training programs on racial profiling and discrimination. Officers were being held to new standards, focused on fairness and respect for citizens. Marcus Davis continued to be actively involved in these reforms, ensuring that this incident would not just be another scandal, but a step toward real change. Jasmine's story and her arrest became an example of how bias can destroy lives, but also of how justice and the fight for rights can change the system. Jasmine and her father proved that even in the darkest moments, one can find the strength to fight for a cause that benefits not only themselves, but society as a whole.